Okay, that's when we start. I'm Jason. Thanks a lot for having me with Pieter. We're going to have a very interesting conversation here about Adyen, about scaling up in Europe, about building a company that's built to last. Adyen is coming up on its 20-year anniversary, I guess you could say. It was founded in 2006, more than 2 billion euros in revenue, pushing about 1 billion of that in profit, which is pretty impressive. Market cap of more than 40 billion, about 4,700 employees, half in the Netherlands, a bunch in the US, scattered everywhere. It's a real, I'd say, we've been talking a lot about building companies in Europe here, and this is kind of a standard bearer of that. Pieter, you were here in Slush 2 years ago. A lot has changed since then, not least the explosion of AI. AI has come up in every conversation I've had over the past couple days here. How would you describe the pace of change at Adyen, in the fintech space, in tech, in the global economy over the past 2 years in the context of the 20 years since you built Adyen? Is it faster, slower, different? What?
It took us many years to build a company to do online transactions. Then we added point-of-sale terminals to that and banking licenses. So basically we had 2 layers, a payments company, banking licenses to make that more powerful and not building over banks, but being independent. And now, if you look at what changed, in the last 2 years, we have a whole additional layer to our platform, which is called dynamic identification, where we, with AI, analyze transactions, and it feeds into the quality of all our products. So where I would say we're now really a fintech, a financial technology company, and we came from being more a payments company. So you also see that in all the products that feeds into. Where we were very payments oriented, you see that we do card issuing, bank accounts, loans. So the whole offering became different. Also what merchants care about is different. Whereas before it was globally being able to accept payments, you get much more to which payment method should I present, which is financially opportune for myself to present, and how do I avoid fraud, and then how does that impact me? So more cost optimized routing and a lot of raising authorization levels.
Right. In terms of the business environment and what's been happening in tech and whatnot over the past 2 years, does it feel faster or more disruptive, or any in that sense, or is this just the past 2 years and the past 20, or like any of the 18 before it?
Throughout history, I think everybody feels that how much changed in the last 5 years supersedes what happened in the 500 years before. But if I would ask that to my mother, she would give the same answer through the things she has seen. So I think we have to be careful to say that.
Recency
but it
bias.
Feels like it, definitely yes.
Okay. And not many companies of Adyen's size are growing as fast as it has recently. So stepping back, could you just tell us, like, both stepping back and looking ahead, stepping back, looking at what you've done over the past 20 years, what have you been doing that would set Adyen up for the next 20 years? Like, we talk a lot about like building companies to last and all this kind of stuff, but like we just said, things are moving so fast. A lot of startups, fail.
Yeah.
To be frank, and
that's
so
a good question.
For the next 20 years,
what we have done is we've built a company where the founders of this company had a company before, and the first 4 employees as well. So we all were part of another company which we sold. And then when we started Adyen, which also means all over again, we thought now that we do it again, let's do it in the right way. And that means that we have been very close to our merchants, always listening, but we pick the things which scale, the things which are applicable for more merchants, the things which are on the path to the future. Because if you, after 20 years of tailor-made solutions, you would be stuck. After 20 years of discipline, you actually have something that really resonates with merchants. So that's what we have been doing. Another thing is we are always looking what's the foundation to build things which merchants need. And some companies try to predict the future, and we try to make a company which is flexible. And when we build such a strong foundation for what's to come, it's easy to fill it in.
Right. And so, I mean, picking what will work is not easy beforehand. Over the past 20 years, you must have seen many hype cycles come and go, technologies come and go, some that lasted, some didn't. How do you know, lessons learned here from a founder, how do you know when a trend is for real versus a short-lived fad or pure hype?
So we have been talking about mobile commerce. Look, I'm a little bit older than most people here. We've been talking about mobile commerce for at least 7 years, or maybe even more, before it took off with the introduction of the iPhone. That's all the years before I was in payments, and all the years before we supported mobile payments, all the years before everybody was talking about it, and we were doing 3 transactions per week. And then overnight things can change. So it's very, very difficult to decide the timing. So that a certain trend is happening is something else than if you would have built a mobile payments company before the iPhone, it would have failed. Mm-hmm. So that's the most difficult part, and therefore I'm not a big fan of trying to say this trend is wrong and that one is right. It's like, okay, if that picks on, what's the impact and what should we then now develop rather than jump on the hype itself. So I've had phone calls from people at a conference in New York. I vividly remember, it's like, everything is going to the metaverse. We're going to the metaverse. Are you on top of it, Pieter? And well, that's one that so far didn't materialize yet. It might. But I've seen many of those trends now over time, and constantly I don't try to judge the timing. I look at, do we have the right stack for that?
Yeah, I want just to pick up on that a little bit more to get into some specifics. Over the past 20 years, have there been, could you share with us any specific, one thing or multiple things, any kind of fork in the road moments for Adyen that where there was a decision you had to make, for example, with people calling you up about the metaverse or whatever before that, where you made a decision and it could have gone another way and we wouldn't be here today, or we would be somewhere else, or Adyen would be somewhere else. Tell us a little bit about some of those.
So from the outside,
times.
Many people think that for us, we started and then it was plain sailing. If you look at reality, 5 years in, we had one customer doing 70% of volume. Not of profit, but of volume. So things could have panned out very differently because it's not a good time to lose that merchant. We had, in 2017, I think, we had a service for platforms, and we signed up eBay. So that's a quite nice introduction into the US market, that you're serious about platforms. And from that, so platform, vertical SaaS, think about a platform for pizzerias, that we don't sign up the small restaurants, but we sign up the platform, and the platform signs up the smaller merchants. That eventually led us to totally drop SME sales, because we felt that it's much better to support the vertical SaaS servicing those markets, and that we focus on large companies. So we are extremely good at large companies, and we're very good at platforms. But that was a fork in the road moment, because signing up such a large platform, showing that you can work with millions of sellers, that I don't know how it would have panned out without deals like that.
Yeah. Inevitably, I want to ask you the next question is, given the excitement, let's say, around AI now and what's happening, we were just talking about maybe hype cycles and forks in the road and all this kind of stuff. Now we're facing what seems like could be a big moment, or not, who knows. Are we in a bubble?
Again, it's not necessary for me to make the call. For Adyen, it's extremely important. All transactions run through AI. Mm-hmm. But if you more talk about when is agentic commerce really going to take off, there are unsolved questions still at this very moment. But you know that Adyen will be the party where many merchants rely on for the payment identity. So where you get the payment details, but you need to have the contract and the identity of the shopper clear. That won't be us. So the contract is the agent allowed to buy for that amount. So we are ourselves enormously benefiting from it in the services we can do. But that's not very futuristic. If you sign up as a merchant, it's easier because we look through our system with dynamic identification. I already know that I have your bank account as a merchant, so I'm not going to ask for a proof of that. Things like that, that's here and now. I know that I've seen you in the past. I can judge that I've seen you as a shopper, so I know that I should let you through, even though your transaction might have some elements that in a more static system would trigger fraud. So that's for here and for now. You do tend to over-index on the impact in the short term and under-index on the impact in the long term. So that's probably true here as well. But from a company point of view, again, we don't need to time it exactly when what will happen.
Okay. You mentioned agentic commerce there, which is something I've been hearing more and more of. Agentic commerce, I've also heard from Adyen about embedded finance, these sorts of things. Can you just walk us through what's most exciting to you maybe now? That's something new, agentic commerce. Like what's going on in fintech now, be AI or not, that is what I find high on your radar?
Most exciting and is a real change is that the vertical SaaS, so the platforms, are offering services to smaller merchants, which in the past could only be done by the very large merchants integrating it themselves. So having insight into shoppers by knowing what's happening in store, what's happening online. And smaller merchants had much more difficulties. And now if you package that together, embedded finance means like, okay, I see your pattern. If you run a yoga studio and you need a new coffee machine, I already have the data there, so I can give you a loan. And I can ask you to pay it back, but I know I just take a part of the incoming funds. So if you have a seasonal business, it's not going to be an enormous draw on you during low season because you can. So the sophistication of what you then can get through that as a smaller merchant is incredible.
Yeah. Zooming out again, having just said all of that, there's a lot of founders out there, I'm sure now, and other startup people and investors and whatnot who are just starting out today. What advice would you give them to build a company to last for 20 years, as Adyen has, and obviously, hopefully longer? But given all the pace of change we've talked about now, just some of those newfangled technologies that you're talking about, like what sorts of decisions might they face? What kind of advice would you have for somebody today here starting up?
One thing that has always worked for me is I had the idea that if you want to build a successful company, it's about attracting the right people to do it, because no matter how good you are, you need to somehow scale it to a wide group. And we are doing very specific things at Adyen. If we hire, you always get a final interview, and until recently with a board member, so one of the 7 directors of the company. And because at a certain point it takes too much time, we expanded it a little bit, a few additional people, but we're very, very strict. So everybody that is hired, then, okay, you have done your coding test or you have done a business case, you've done that well, but then there's always the final interview round where we look, is this a good cultural fit? Is this a way to scale a company where highly talented people want to work? Because we feel if you can build a place where the density of talented people is very high, that's in itself an attraction to get those people to build your company. And I think that if you would talk here to successful entrepreneurs, everybody would say it was because of the talented people that we had working for us. So I think you have to focus on, and advise, you can always advise multiple things, but that's one of the things that has always worked for me. How do I attract talented people, and what's the cool environment for them to work in? And if you can provide that, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. I would say particularly in AI, it seems to me there's a real war for talent on now. It can be quite expensive to get the best engineers and this sort of thing. Do you find that so with that, when it comes to building those teams, which you say are so important, but maybe other things too, is it easier or harder to start up now in let's say a fintech company than it was for you in 2006? Or do you feel like a lot of these issues are fundamental and always the same across time?
There's something going on. I'm just back from a few weeks in San Francisco, and if I speak to investors, many investors say we consider to only invest in AI, and there are even some investors where the LPs, so the people who fund the fund, are saying you are only allowed to invest in AI. So that makes a non-AI startup more difficult to fund, if that's the trend, and easier for an AI startup. So you get some other market dynamics than what you usually see.
Right. Speaking sort of obliquely about San Francisco, I guess, there's a lot of talk in Slush this year and every year, but I think particularly this year about Europe's place in the tech ecosystem, in the global economy, and what have you. As a company built, scaled, invested in, listed in Europe over so many years, from your perspective, what advantages, if any, what competitive advantages, if any, are there to building and growing a company here in Europe today versus obviously Silicon Valley or other places?
I think wherever you start your company, it has pros and cons. And I'm actually quite gung-ho about starting a company in Europe. And you see that just before COVID, my co-founder stopped, the CTO, and he started a new company. He can start a company wherever he wants. He decides to start a company again in the Netherlands. So it's not that Europe is successful despite being in Europe. It's a good place to build a company. And yes, some things you wish were different. But I also see the challenges of having a huge office in the US. And that has its own dynamics and its own problems. We have had the opportunity to link certain engineers to us for a long time because, hey, you live in Amsterdam, it's a great company to work for. Where else do you want to go? And that gave us the opportunity to go very deep into payments and to build a bank, to be directly connected to all payment methods. Now this dynamic identification layer. That could be very difficult if you're sitting in San Francisco, because that sort of long-term commitment to one company is less common there.
Yeah.
And so,
what would make it easier or better to do business in Europe today? What's on your wish list there?
The European Union has different interpretations of regulation per country. That's annoying. So it's not about where the level of regulation is, but that's different in each country. Makes it very difficult for us to roll something out for across Europe. I do think that sometimes we forget that the world is an open economy and that we all in this room are competing with the world and not so local. And sometimes there's regulation coming out which is there to protect something local, but which is hindering us global companies to and you can often work around it, but it's an additional hassle.
Yeah, great. Let's zoom in now maybe a little bit more on fintech, on finance, on what Adyen does. To put your to pull out your crystal ball, let's say, over the next 20 years, I mean 20 years from now, if, knock on wood, we're both here on stage talking about Adyen then, I mean, what would you want us to be talking about? What do you see in the future? What maybe aren't we talking about now that you think could be very important to Adyen, to the space, to Europe, to the economy?
So the current part of the payment market, so the total addressable markets as investors would use, is that the current new players maybe together have, I think, single-digit percentage of the market. So the majority is still with the incumbents. So what I'm focused on is making sure that Adyen takes up a big part of that market that is still to come. So if you say, what does that look like in 20 years? That's a bigger Adyen, but the real question is, what services to invest in now, where to invest, where to partner, and how to position yourself to be the best player for that. And that's the decisions today will decide who is best in taking in that 90% of the market, which will migrate to more modern companies for sure.
Right. And you had mentioned some of the specific technologies before, but in your space, or just when you're talking to investors in Silicon Valley or whatever, what technologies or trends are you particularly excited about, or do you think that are coming around the corner that, beyond AI, obviously, which is very important, or maybe different flavors of AI? Where do you think the biggest opportunities are, or that you think might not be hype, or that we're not talking enough about?
I find it a difficult question because I'm more a believer of to run a company in such a way that let the merchant and the markets decide where things go, rather than placing my own bet. There was a time that we were supporting Bitcoin, but we never were making big announcement on it. And at a certain point you see it's not being used by our merchants, and then silently you switch it off, because if there's no demand, why do it? So in all the trends that are ongoing, sometimes stablecoin, of course we closely track it, of course we have people working on it. But to take a big position today, if it's not a discussion of the large merchants that we have, if they are asking us to solve other problems, let's then see the common denominator and develop that, rather than...
Yeah, hedging your bets.
So I pride myself in not being very visionary.
That's okay. And we are running out of time, but I know I asked you earlier about what you would advice you'd have for founders, but I just want to kind of come back to it because there's so many startups here and investors and pre-seed, Series A, B, like the whole gamut. And I'm just kind of curious for your sort of like final thoughts, what the people you've been meeting in the past few days and whatnot, what's like one or two pieces of advice that you would have for startups today? Again, you went through this, well, a few times, but 2006 before, and knowing what you know now over the past 20 years, I'm sure a lot of people ask you, like, hey, I'm starting in 2025. What can I learn from Adyen's experience?
Yeah, unfortunately, I always have very down-to-earth advice, and I advise a few startups. Realize that all the odds are against you. So if I say you have a chance in 1 of 100, which is a depressing number, then it's probably still optimistic. So everything you do should be geared towards getting to a 1 in 50, a 1 in 25. And how are your actions today related to that? And if you embrace that you're in a high-risk environment, then there's a lot of things which ultimately you don't need to do today. Creating an HR framework, you won't need it if you don't make it. So do you really need that today? Maybe yes, or maybe not. But I try to do the things today, and that's what I always have done. So I've now had 2 startups. That's what I've always done. Is this the best way to spend this week to increase the chances to survival? And if I speak to current startups, the risk is, and I don't coin this, but there's this micro celebrity syndrome. You're in your small peer group, very well known, and it gives a feeling of success. Realize chances are against you. Are you doing everything to get there?
That's great. That's very realistic and tangible advice from you, Pieter. I thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us, and thank you for having us.